The Mike Hosking Breakfast, 6 to 9 weekdays on Newstalk ZB.
Heath Franklin is with us. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
For people who are going to watch this on audio, there's two personas here, this Heath and your character. The Chopper, I remember, funnily enough. I go back, long enough to remember the real Chopper.
I am.
The attraction was what?
To be honest, the attraction was the movie, the Eric Bana film. I just watched it when I was early 20s. And, like a lot of the movies you watch when you get that age, you just sort of watch them and then you absorb it slowly. And so I'd be hanging around with friends at a party and, someone would go to sleep early and I'd be like, oh, look at this guy. Off you go. Off to sleep, mate. All right, you loser. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, I was doing some comedy shows at uni, some sketch comedy shows. And someone said, why don't you do that as one of the sketches? And that's kind of where it started.
Do you do other stuff apart from Chopper?
I used to when I was physically a bit more in shape, but now Chopper's pretty much the only character I can get away with. I used to do Bear Grylls, but that's not convincing anymore.
No
one looks at a 120 kilo Bear Grylls and goes, that's believable. So.
Well, what happened to the weight? You let yourself go? Or
Well, when Chopper's on stage, he drinks the beer, and then when I get off stage, I'm the guy who has to do the sit-ups. So, unfortunately, Chopper's been in control for too long.
Is the interesting thing now that Chopper was the late 90s, early 2000s, so we're going back a couple of decades now. There will presumably be people who look at your act and like what you do and have no idea about the original story.
Well, that's the dream, to be honest. I mean, I find the thing that kind of weighs me down the most is, especially when I go to Melbourne, where they're quite parochial and proud of even their violent thug criminals. There's a constant kind of reference between what I do and what he would have done. They're like, oh, Chopper wouldn't have done that. It's like, well, he wouldn't have been funny for an hour either. He would have been a bit grim and depressing. So I really love coming to New Zealand, where I kind of get to define what the character does, and I get to kind of step out of that shadow. Because, as I said, I was never kind of trying to be a biographer for the real Chopper. I was just a guy who liked a movie and made a dumb sketch.
You met him?
Yeah, it was incredibly awkward.
I'm not surprised, because he wasn't a personality of any note. He was a thug, basically, wasn't he?
He was a criminal with a real knack for self-promotion. And then, I mean, especially, around the time that I started doing the character, he had his face on beer and peanuts. He put out a hip-hop album, which I think if people who are hip-hop purists listen to it would probably be
shocked,
remiss to describe it as
disappointed.
Grossly disappointed. It's one of those, white people are like, oh, hip-hop's just poetry with a drum beat underneath. And it sounds more like aggressive Dr. Zeus than anything else. But yeah, he just had a knack for self-promotion. When everyone else comes out of court with their jacket over their head, he came out smiling and waving to the cameras. So.
Yeah. Dad, what is it about Melbourne, by the way? You trigger me. My dad lived in Melbourne for many years, and I've been to Melbourne a million times. I love Melbourne, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, what is it about Melbourne, whether that underworld, that underbelly, that thing, what is it about Melbourne that grows that kind of activity?
I'm not sure. I mean, there's always been a kind of, my theory is that there's always balance. If a city gets quite left, then it also gets quite right as a reaction to it. So I assume there were so many kind of doe-eyed hippies in Melbourne that someone's like, geez, I want to punch some of these people. That's my best theory.
You were doing comedy because you did law, didn't you?
Yeah, I started off studying law.
How does that happen? Because how many people do you know that started off studying law and gave it up, or two, studied law, got to be a lawyer, then realised it was not for them?
There's actually a few comedians in Australia, at least, that have taken that path. But, I mean, for me personally, I got the marks to get into law. I didn't think comedy would be a viable career at all. And I got 3 years into the degree, and I looked around at everyone in the room, and I thought, I don't get on with these people. And if I keep doing this, I'll have to spend the rest of my life with them. So, yeah, that's when I made the decision to drop out of law and start doing performance studies and things like that.
Did it take off?
Performance studies.
Yeah.
I actually was given a TV show before I finished my degree. So I was like,
come on. So you go back to the class and go, guys, I don't have time for this.
Yeah, well,
because I got TV.
There was one of my tutors failed me in a script writing course, and then 2 years later, I'd written 50% of a TV show. So I was like, well, thanks for nothing, champ.
Yeah, see, how many people have got successful and then tell the story, oh, when I was at school, my teacher said I'd never amount to anything. Or not to try that because that's a go nowhere.
Yeah, well, I'm one of them. I don't know how many others there are.
How successful are you in Australia versus, say, here? Because the story of you here is, I mean, you'd have to conclude that 7 Days has been tremendous for you.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt at all. And it was great having the opportunity to get on board with that as it was just sort of starting out. It was a fledgling show, I think, when I started doing it. And so to kind of be along for the ride as it got more and more popular was fantastic. And there's no doubt that that's a massive part of my audience here in New Zealand. But I think, once again, as I was saying before, the fact that I'm not constantly compared to the real Chopper makes a big difference as well. And I think, there's a lot more of that in Australia.
Yeah. And so you've been able to make. Do you transfer outside of New Zealand and Australia? Can you tour? Could you hit Singapore, Taiwan, Indonesia and go well?
Oh, I don't know about Singapore, Taiwan and Indonesia. I've done the Edinburgh Festival a few times and that's gone well because, there's a lot of expats over there and I think the sense of humour translates well to the English, but it's just so far to go to do comedy, You
got a couple of kids?
Yeah, and which is another reason that going to the UK for a month is lunacy, really.
What do they make it? Are they old enough to work out what Dad does?
Yeah, they've figured it out actually, and they're on TikTok, and I've started putting stuff on TikTok as well. So it's inevitable. But there was
the TikTok
a couple of years ago where my kids kept asking me what I did for a living, so I decided to put on a kids show with one of my other friends, just so I could take them to that and be like, "See, this is what Dad does. It's wholesome and nice. Dad pretends to be a pirate."
And did they believe it?
They did at the time. Yeah, kids are quite credulous.
And what do they make of it now?
I think they're used to it or bored of it. I mean, they'll be at home playing video games. We've just had the school holidays, and then I'll be downstairs trying to film something. I'm like, shut up and stop listening. Dad's about to monetize swearing. So,
how do you have a view on TikTok in general? Given the geopolitical tension around it and everyone's trying to ban it versus, the campaigning on it and they can't get enough of it?
I mean, to be honest, I really enjoy the idea of a social media platform with no Americans on it. I think that'll be a beautiful oasis. But, that's a very superficial look at it. But, I mean, I'm just at the point, where there's so many platforms now, you've got to be on all of them to stay competitive. So I guess it's just one of those necessary evils, unfortunately.
How competitive is it, the circuit in Australia, the comedic circuit?
There's a lot of comedians. There's probably more than I'd like. But there's plenty of room for everyone, to do well.
Yeah. How big's the leap of persona from Heath to Chopper? In other words, how much do you hide behind that?
It's not too much, actually. I mean, when we were working on the TV show back in the day, I'd come in and complain about something, and everyone would roll their eyes and be like, "Yeah, good on you, Heath. You're so negative about everything." And then I would literally say the exact same thing as Chopper, and people were like, "That's comedic genius." And I'll be like, "What am I, chopped liver?" So yeah, I think I don't know. I think there's something about the mustache and the tattoos softens the rants or make them more panto or something like that. But I definitely have a knack for I don't know, cynicism.
Has this got, how many years has this got? This has got forever, or?
I think so. I hope so.
Yeah.
I've got nothing else to fall back on.
What, you got law? Well, you got a couple.
Half a law degree.
You got half a law degree.
I think the law's changed in the last 20 years as well. But, hopefully it can keep going. I think a lot of kind of older comedians are starting to grumble about what you can and can't say, and I think I've just sort of,
you just do your thing,
taking that on as a challenge to kind of say what I want to say, but say it in a tasteful way.
Is part of it the expectation, though? I mean, part of what gets people into trouble, of course, is that it comes out of nowhere and they're shocked. Whereas, people must know what you're about.
Oh yeah, I think that helps. For sure. But I don't know. I also think that when I write comedy, I try and write things that no one else is talking about because, it is a competitive industry. And if you're telling the same jokes as everyone else, then you don't need to be there. Yeah. And so by the very nature of doing that, I think that I'm more inclined to swim upstream and swim against the tide. In fact, with this show, I used to say at the start of the show, you're going to disagree with me during the show, and the truth is that I disagree with myself for a lot of this. I'm just literally saying what I think is the funniest thing.
That's a good way to be.
Yeah, so hopefully that's a philosophy that keeps
It's
working.
a real frisson out there, isn't it? If you see, I assume you watch it like the Dave Chappelle specials and all that sort of stuff. There's a real I don't know, angst in the world about what you can say, can't say, get cancelled, not get cancelled and stuff. You're in the middle of all of that. You just do the best you can.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's some topics that, you know, you have hot topics that if you touch them, then you've got to be accountable for that. And I'm like, well, I'll just write jokes about something else. I'm not going to court controversy and danger for no reason. And I'm not going to offend people for no reason. But I mean, I think the thing that drives me the craziest about this whole kind of, you know, getting cancelled and blah, blah thing is that, you know, on the extreme left, everyone's trying to be offended about everything. And then the extreme right, everyone's trying to be as offensive as possible for no reason. And as usual, it's the same people in the middle who are like, why don't we just shut up and listen to some jokes, you know? Like, and so this whole idea of everyone watching about what you can and can't say means that people aren't paying attention to what you're actually saying anymore. So it'd be great if we could just get to the point where everyone just unclenches and just unclenches and just relaxes.
That's a great way to put it. Are you getting better?
I think so. I think I watched part of one of my old DVDs, one of the first shows I did. I mean, the fact it's on DVD says a lot. And I think if I try putting that out now, I'll get booed off stage. So yeah, I've put a lot of work into getting better and more interesting, and yeah, more surprising and appealing.
Good on you. Good on you. Well, listen, have a good tour of the country. A fair few dates there.
Yeah, a couple. There's still a few people who are sending me emails saying, why aren't you coming here? But I'm doing my best.
Good on you. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
The Mike Hosking Breakfast, 6 to 9 weekdays on Newstalk ZB.